Yo, what's good, Shinobi Nation? Welcome back to Just a Shinobi, the home of the craziest Naruto what ifs. Today we're jumping into part 7 of What If Naruto Says I Am Not Going to Puberty Again. So strap in, because things are about to get explosive. If you're new to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, and share this video with your whole ninja squad. And of course, drop your theories in the comments. Your support is what keeps this shinobi grinding. More sake! Keep it comin'! I ain't half drunk enough for this shit yet. Uproarious laughter sounded through the ruins of the rec center. Tables were upended, chairs splintered and buckled, glass shards from beer bottles liberally sprinkling the floor. Music came intermittently, warped and warbling, out of sparking speaker systems. Half of the lights were burned out or dangling by their wires from the ceiling, flashing on and off as they swayed side to side. Walls were pitted and perforated with holes of every size. Unconscious bodies were scattered to and fro in varying states of dress. A number of soused, drowsing young adults wore but lampshades and togas fashioned from tablecloths. Redheads of every age and shape were clustered here and there in small groups, along with a smattering of black, brown, and dirty blonde-haired folk. Tipsy women leaned on red-faced men, and vice versa, more than a few hands from both genders roaming to decidedly inappropriate places. Anecdotes and dirty jokes were swapped in slurred or too loud voices, along with spit and blows as a few people degenerated hither and yon into making out or duking it out. More than a few fistfights erupted, and with the way some unlikely couples were going, it seemed that at least a few of the Uzumaki and Uchiha relatives were giving their college best at repopulating their respective clans. The rec center was in shambles. Lee had gotten into some sake halfway into the party, thinking it was water. All it took was one sip, and he roughly grabbed Karen by the waist and slung her over his shoulder, then went on a shrunken rampage. And all of the people who might have been strong enough to actually stop him were either unconscious, busy getting down and dirty, too drunk to see past their own nose, or some combination of the above. Karen, from the way she reacted though, was not especially unhappy with this. And Niji and Tenten, for their parts, were holding each other under a table and trying not to collapse in nervous paroxysms of drunk Rock Lee-induced PTSD. They looked very cozy together, once you got past the gaping mouths and 100-yard stares. Aoba Yamashiro, who had come in a while back on noise complaints only to be dragged into the back by a hungrily grinning Anoka, stumbled through the ruins of the rec center with his clothes in tatters, lipstick smudges all over his neck, and a dopey ear-to-ear grin on his face. Taumaki of the Cat Clan, a late arrival on the Uchiha side, dragged a confusedly pleased-looking Kiba Inuzuka into the center with a guileless grin on her face. And Tayuya of the Sound, a late arrival on the Uzumaki side, who had only decided to come because neither hide nor hair had been seen of Orochimaru-sama in a month, glared daggers at any guy who looked funny at her and her date, Kintsuchi. Kakashi and Anko were still buried in a closet somewhere, well on their way to walking crooked for a month. Killer B had an arm over a half-melancholy, half-flirtatious, all-drunk Natsuhi. Samui and Omoa, at the same time, were awkwardly trying to either have a moment nor gag at the sight of Karui and Chuji sharing a small cake. Iruka and Shizen were huddled together in a corner, pointedly ignoring the mayhem which had descended on the reunion as they gave a decent go at eating each other's faces off. A half-empty bottle of champagne sat beside them. Sakura was chatting with Sasuke and a thoughtful Taro Yamada, actually Itachi Uchiha in disguise, gesturing cheerfully to a very official-looking scroll bearing the Hokage's wax seal. Naruto, who had handed Sakura that scroll after popping back in, was now cozying up with Hinata and cheerfully listening to her as she recounted the recent events. Tsunade and Jiraiya, at the heart of the storm that was the Uzumaki and Uchiha family reunion, were drinking like fish atop a hill of wreckage and rubble. The rec center was in shambles all around them. It looked like it had been hit by a hurricane or bijou, but the truth was arguably scarier. It was a battlefield, the aftermath of an Uzumaki party. Some families forewent reunions and other gatherings because of blood feuds or grudges between branches. A cousin said something about someone's mother's haircut, or an uncle borrowed someone's best hedge clippers and then lost them, or a dispute between brothers split a clan down its center and entrenched each side in a smoldering hatred for the other that got passed down to their descendants for generations upon generations until no one could remember why the hell they hated each other so much. You know, things like that. When it came to Uzumaki, however, it was mostly just a matter of the property damage, hangovers, and bastards sure to ensue from any gathering of more than 5 of them in one place. Some older Uzumaki joked that this, and not fear of their prowess, was the real reason so many nations had joined forces just to try and wipe them out. Sure, they were capable of binding the god of death to a ceremonial mask, and yeah, they had jutsu to rip the souls out of people's bodies and eternally deny them passage into the afterlife. But a pack of boozed-up Uzumaki partying in the streets was more terrifying than any number of tailed beasts. Of course, the distant civilian Uchiha relatives gave their own hand at creating this chaos, too. They might not have inherited the visual prowess, potent chakra, ninjutsu talent, or name of their practically extinct shinobi kin, but they were every bit as passionate and impulsive. Even more so, in a way, as they didn't try to act as stoic and emotionless as possible, unlike many of their late ninja relatives. Uchiha and Senju, it must be said, were like oil and water. They simply did not mix. Uchiha and Uzumaki, on the other hand, were like oil and fire. They mixed all too well. What did you say about my mother? I called her a very classy lady, sir. Pow! She was a whore, you son of a bitch! A pair of bickering men crashed through one of the few intact tables left, sending half-empty glasses flying. One punched the other in the nose, and the other retaliated by kneeing the one in the groin. Equally infuriated, they went for each other's throats. This barely warranted a second glance from the other partygoers. An explosion rocked the building, and a goodly chunk of one of the outer walls was reduced to a fine particulate. Rubble crashed to the floor with a deafening noise, and smoke rushed through the air, all as a trio of giggling redheads scribbled out blasting seals on napkins. No one reacted to this, unless you counted one very tipsy couple tripping over a bit of plaster and proceeding to make out in plain view of the sidewalk outside the new hole in the wall. I wonder Rock slurred a particularly drunk old man elsewhere. Roxanne chest chorused his even drunker daughter beside him. In fighting as in love her husband crooned. Something something we are. On the way! They finished together, before taking a simultaneous draft. At the same time, Rock Lee bobbed and weaved through a crowd of brawling drunks, sending bodies flying this way and that. He was a blur, swirling to and fro with fluid yet erratic movements. Duck, punch, 1-2, kick, faceplant. Hiccup. Roll. Hop, spin, back on his feet. Punch, punch, punch. And all while Karen clung to him like her life depended on it. Go home, Taro. You're drunk, said one teen to her friend meanwhile. I swear to drunk, I'm not fuck, her friend cursed. I swear to fuck I'm not, oh goddammit. You are so drunk. Oh, go god yourself. Drunk, I mean? No, fuck. Taro shook his head. I swear to tits, I am not looking at your ass. That one wasn't even close. I swear to God I'm not horny. I don't know, that isn't much beto. Yeah? Sorry about that, Hana-chan. No, she said, nervously clearing her throat. That's okay. Pause. Blush. That's okay. Very okay. Just perfect. It couldn't be better. He blushed in turn, and said nothing. Both went awkwardly silent. Neither one could meet the other's eye. Another explosion rocked the building. I'm drunk, Jiraiya said, staring clearly into the distance. No shit, Tsunade retorted, taking another swig. I can smell it. Are you sure that you're smelling yourself, princess? I am not drunk, she sniped. Up yours. I'm not into that, thanks. He laughed. How about yours instead? Pervert, Tsunade grumbled. You say that like it's a bad thing. When it comes to you? It is. Jiraiya waved a hand airily. You know you love me. Love is a strong word. Like, maybe? Or tolerate, Tsunade riposted. She shook her head with a sigh then. But yes, despite my better judgment, I do. Clearly, I've gone insane. Sanity is overrated, said Jiraiya sagely. Better to be a crazy love fool than anything else, in this upside-down world of ours. He took another sip. But I'll say it again, he muttered after a moment of silence. I must be extremely drunk right now. Because you've gone 20 minutes without chasing after some skirt? Tsunade dryly quipped. No, Jiraiya said. He paused. Well, yes. That too. But actually, I was referring to the hallucinations. Tsunade punched him on the shoulder. Just a normal human punch, no chakra-enhanced super strength to be found. If you're hallucinating anything about me, you'd better stop right now, she sniffed. I know how that mind of yours works, and I do not want you thinking about me naked. Then she paused. Wait, maybe I'm drunker than I thought, but I am pretty sure that hallucinations are not a normal effect of alcohol. Have you been putting something else in your drinks? No, Jiraiya said. At least I don't think so. But I have to be hallucinating. Maybe you really are crazy, Tsunade drawled. Maybe I am, Jiraiya said thoughtfully. He groaned. Damn it, drinking with you always makes me so melancholy. I wouldn't be thinking about this if I was with a nice, cute, friendly hostess. Tsunade snorted. You're not exactly the best drinking partner either, she replied. I'm only gloomy because you're here. Jiraiya shook his head distractedly. I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing a fake resemblance. Tell me that girl doesn't look like Conan. He pointed at a woman with blue hair and a fairly skimpy backless top. Who's that? Tsunade said, squinting. An old girlfriend? A beat. Jealous, are we? Jiraiya smirked. Not of her, Tsunade promptly replied. I'd sooner be jealous of you. Jiraiya laughed and waggled his eyebrows. Even better, he crowed. That mental image. Tsunade punched him again on the shoulder. Hard this time. Don't you start, she said warningly. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Sure it isn't, he said slyly. But seriously, the resemblance really is uncanny. That isn't Conan, right? It can't be. Again, I have no idea who that is, Tsunade said, shaking her head. Jiraiya looked at her thoughtfully. He frowned and scratched his chin. Do you remember those orphans in the Land of Rain? He asked her. The ones I stayed behind to teach. Tsunade furrowed her brow for a minute, before slowly nodding. Yeah, I think so. There were 3 of them, right? Right, Jiraiya said. And one of them was Conan. The girl, the blue-haired one. Do you remember now? Tsunade said. It's a bit fuzzy, but I think I recall the face. She was a very cute little kid. She frowned then, and gave Jiraiya a sidelong look. You didn't. Absolutely not, Jiraiya said firmly. I'm not such a detestable human being as to go after a child, whatever else you might think of me. Okay, I believe you, Tsunade said placatingly. She looked out into the crowd, peering over the wreckage. But if that woman over there is Conan? Because she is quite striking, I must say. Jiraiya coughed. Well, if she was, then I see no reason why I couldn't now, he mumbled. I mean, she'd be an adult woman by now. Perfectly capable of making her own decisions. Then he shook his head. But that woman can't actually be Conan, he insisted. It's impossible. Why? Tsunade asked. She's dead, Jiraiya said grimly. She has to be. Last I'd heard of them, they had crossed Hanzo, the reckless fools, and that was years ago, besides. Over a decade with no news. Tsunade winced. Oh, she said, immediately understanding. I'm sorry. No, it's okay, Jiraiya said. The alcohol's just got me reminiscing, and I'm seeing a resemblance where there isn't any. I'm sure of it. Maybe you should go talk to her, Tsunade suggested. Prove that it isn't that kid. Just so you stop tearing yourself up over the possibility. Yeah, maybe I should. Jiraiya nodded slowly. It won't bother you if I hit on her, will it? Because I won't be able to help myself, I think. That is a very lovely lady. Bah, feel free, Tsunade said, waving a hand dismissively. It's not like we're here together or anything. We just both happen to be invited by our respective pupils. Jiraiya smiled and stood up. You're a good friend, princess, he said. One of us has to be, Tsunade snorted. Jiraiya walked over to the blue-haired woman in black. Tsunade watched him greet her, probably dropping a lame pickup line or cheesy compliment, maybe even propositioning her outright. Tsunade fiercely suppressed the unpleasant feeling that swelled in her gut at this thought. She saw his eyes drop down to the woman's bare abdomen, her attire something that more conservative sorts might call borderline obscene. The idiot stared up and down the brunette's body for at least a few seconds longer than was remotely polite. His grin was stupid as hell, too. Tsunade resisted the urge to scoff. The woman stared at Jiraiya as well, though. From this distance Tsunade couldn't quite make out her expression, but it probably wasn't anything terribly indicative of a receptiveness toward Jiraiya's laughable advances. The man's lines had been outdated and cheesy back when they were kids, and time had not made them any cooler or more effective. Statistically, of course, Tsunade supposed that there must be some women who found Jiraiya charming, ones who were willing to shack up with him without payment up front. There was no accounting for taste, after all. But this woman was not one of them, judging by the way she slapped Jiraiya after several seconds of mutual staring. Her expression turned livid, and she started snarling, hissing words that Tsunade could not hear or make out. But her voice did rise at one point, high enough for anyone to hear, loud and clearly accusatory. "How you abandoned us!" And then she slapped Jiraiya again. For a moment, he stood stock still, as if he were in shock. Tsunade scowled. Well, maybe this woman was a former girlfriend, she thought darkly, if she was saying something like that. She knew Jiraiya had commitment issues, but if this was what Tsunade thought it sounded like, then he had reached an all-time low. Knocking a woman up, then skipping town. The fact that Jiraiya had never done anything like this before was one of the only reasons Tsunade had ever even halfway tolerated his womanizing habits. But then Jiraiya did something that shocked Tsunade out of her rueful introspection. Something she absolutely would not have ever expected. He retaliated. Slapped the woman right back. "You damn fool!" he shouted, his voice loud and booming, his face livid. Tsunade could hear him loud and clear. She was stunned. So too, it seemed, was the woman. "I thought you were all dead," Jiraiya roared, stomping and clenching his fists. "No matter how talented you might have been, the last thing I ever heard of you brats was that you'd made enemies of Hanzo. I taught you kids so you could survive, damn it! Not for you to throw your lives away fighting a hopeless battle." And suddenly the whole situation made a lot more sense, and also much less sense. This was Conan, it seemed, and somehow that brat had survived all these years despite crossing Hanzo. No idea how that could have happened. Still, Tsunade thought. At least she wasn't actually Jiraiya's baby mama. That would have been just weird. Hinata perked up, snuggled next to Naruto as she was. Her yukata was a pale color that complemented her eyes, and emphasized the more classically beautiful aspects of her visage: pale skin, dark hair, all very graceful and aristocratic. It believed nothing of the capable kunoichi underneath. She smiled serenely and squeezed the blonde's hand, getting his attention. Naruto looked up, a vaguely bewildered expression on his face. He had been rather enjoying the warmth and faint flowery fragrance. "Nagato-san is here," Hinata murmured. "Is he now?" Naruto said. "That's a surprise. How'd he get here so quickly, I wonder?" "Possibly a reverse summoning, maybe," Hinata guessed. "But that's not important. We should go greet him. It's only polite." Naruto nodded. "Right, we did put him through an awful lot of trouble, didn't we? I suppose I should at least have the decency to go and say hello." "Yes, and I'll come with you," Hinata said. "It will be nice to meet him under happier circumstances." "Yeah, probably," Naruto agreed. They reached Nagato pretty quickly, with Hinata's enabling her to easily chart a short and clear path through the labyrinthine heaps of rubble and broken furniture. It was his Deva path that they found, Yahiko's reanimated corpse used as a morbid sort of puppet and mouthpiece, rather than the man himself, but Naruto figured that Nagato was probably somewhere nearby anyways. The man had to be within a certain range of his 6 paths to control them, if memory served him right. That aside, D.P., as Naruto had decided to mentally dub Nagato's Tendo, or Deva path, pain, was interesting enough, not wearing the usual Akatsuki cloak. His clothes were a conventional if somewhat old-fashioned blend of dark fabric and fishnet trim, nothing worth more than a passing mention, and his eyes were staring across the large, intermittently lit room. Hinata saw a woman who could only be Conan several meters away, in the direction Pain was looking. The brunette looked to be having some manner of row with Jiraiya, her body language betraying an intricate and roiling melange of anger, distress, relief, frustration, bitterness, and sadness. Very complicated emotions, a visible turmoil. Jiraiya was a bit more straightforward, with a shell of stern anger coating a blended, squishy core of elation and regret. At the same time, Pain's expression, while seemingly stolid and immovable, was flickering minutely at the edges, like a thick and pebbled skin peeling back to reveal the soft, bittersweet flesh underneath. Hinata felt her stomach rumble, just a tiny bit. "Hey, cuz! Glad to see you could make it after all." Naruto cheerfully greeted Pain. "How was the trip over?" Nagato's Deva Path maintained a neutral expression and perfect composure. He did not jump or give a start. Despite that, however, it was clear from the slightest shift of the light in his Rinnegan that this loud and sudden salutation caught him quite off guard. He turned to look at Naruto, reluctant to take an eye off Conan and Jiraiya. Almost imperceptibly, he frowned. Hinata looked into those two gray, rippled eyes, remembering despite herself how her last encounter with this man had gone. If you could really call a corpse preserved, given a semblance of life, and manipulated via mad science and ninja voodoo puppetry, a man. But the eyes were Nagato's, so perhaps that would do. She stared into those Rinnegan and smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "It was eventful," Pain said, phrasing the statement carefully. He frowned and looked askance at Hinata. "I did not think we would make it in time either, to be honest, but it seems the festivities have only just begun. The building is still standing." The deadpan, perfectly monotone delivery of this line made it unclear whether Nagato meant the statement as a joke or a serious observation, but Naruto laughed all the same. "You've been to an Uzumaki fiesta before, then I'll take it," he replied, chuckling. "Once, that I can remember," Pain said. "I think it was my mother's birthday, and a handful of relatives came over. It was quite the experience." "I can bet," Naruto said, nodding emphatically. "I understand my own mom's sweet 16 was a hell of a thing. She and her friend Mikoto burned down half of the Forest of Death and sent giant tigers stampeding through the village, or so I've heard, and they nearly leveled a fourth of the Uchiha district with nothing but a few sparklers and firecrackers." "Impressive," Pain said, and there was a ring of something genuine under the stoic monotone. "How many?" He paused, frowning a bit uncomfortably and glancing momentarily at Hinata, before shaking his head. How many Uzumaki were there at the party?" "Just her and her mom, as far as I know." "Really? That seems a bit extreme, for so few." "Mikoto-san was Sasuke's mother," Naruto said, as if this explained everything. "Putting those two in a room together was like throwing gasoline-soaked paper bombs on a fire, Pervy Sage tells me. And considering what Sasuke's like when he cuts loose, I can believe it. Hey, you should have seen his bachelor party." Pain curled an eyebrow. He looked sidelong at Hinata again, and almost fidgeted for a moment. "You attended a bachelor party?" he said, clearly skeptical. Naruto shrugged. "I'm very mature for my age," he lied. Somewhat. It was a half-lie, really. 3/4 at the most. He could be relatively mature a lot of the time, but for his actual age? Not especially, no. For a man in his mid to late 30s, Naruto could honestly still be quite childish on occasion, especially when irked or excited. And Pain gave the blonde a blank look that seemed to say, "Are you kidding me?" showing that he clearly didn't buy this claim either. Then he twitched, and frowned again. "Might I ask why you are projecting so much killing intent in my direction?" he slowly inquired, turning to face Hinata. "It is distracting." Hinata smiled, and Pain visibly flinched. "My apologies," she said with a sugary sweet insincerity, radiating enough icy malice to freeze over hell. "But the last time I saw someone with your eyes, they were trying to kill my beloved. You understand, I'm sure." "Oh, I see," Pain said, managing to regain his composure even despite Hinata's formidable sake. Then he blinked. "Wait, what?" For the first time, P.S. expression broke completely from its stony facade. He showed actual human emotion on his face. An impressive feat, considering that this was basically and technically just a remote-controlled corpse. Elsewhere, Nagato did a spit take. Pain stared owlishly at Hinata. Others with the Rinnegan? He said incredulously. I find that hard to believe. Hinata's smile became even more perilously saccharine. She laughed demurely. It's more common than you'd think, Redheart. In a supply closet that had somehow escaped the general madness and destruction of the reunion thus far, Kakashi sneezed. Ah, geez. You got it all over my chest, Anko Tsutate. Gesundheit. Sorry, Kakashi sniffed. I don't usually have that problem. Sure you don't, Anko said, slyly smirking. And I bet you don't usually sneeze while doing it either. Kakashi blushed, but cleared his throat with dignity. You wound me, Anko. Playfully she quipped, I try. Lying on a tiled floor in an undefinable space, Obito weakly struggled to stem the gouts of blood. Despite making it into the relative safety of his ocular pocket dimension, and despite the incredible vitality and regenerative abilities granted him by the first Hokage's cells, it seemed he wasn't quite out of the woods yet. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Like a geyser, his exsanguination redoubled to a dangerously absurd level of force. Where was all that blood even coming from? And why the hell was he seeing visions of a naked Anko? Even if the images were just a trick of his eye trying to make sense of the absolute blackness overhead, it was much more vivid than any mere optical illusion, seeming as real as the limitless void within his eye. The subject of the hallucination was also strange, compared to his normal fantasies. Usually it was Rin, or maybe Kushina, or Konan, or one of his prettier cousins, on rare occasions, or Deidara, before he'd learned the Mad Bomber's real gender, or even Kakashi, that one time he tried not to think about it. But Anko? No, never. Not even once. So what the hell was all this? Achoo! He abruptly sneezed, spewing a gross mist of spittle, mucus, and blood into the air. Mostly blood, judging by how red it was. Luckily, the nosebleed started to die down about then, and Obito felt grateful through the light-headed wooziness. It trickled to a near-complete stop, and he briefly rummaged for a blood-replenishing pill, popping one into his mouth when he found the bottle. He let out a sigh of relief, and started to turn his attention to crafting himself a couple replacement limbs. Then Anko turned around. His nostrils erupted once more with twin jets of scarlet, the expelled life fluid generating enough thrust to throw his head backwards into the floor. Crack! And knock him unconscious. Back in Konoha, in the condemned old Uchiha district, two brothers simultaneously let out a mighty pair of sneezes. They nearly dropped the crate they were carrying, a large thing branded with fragile and several harshly colored warning labels. Behind them, a number of distant relatives ran riot through the district, unaware of the massacre that had taken place there several years prior. A few Uzumaki were present as well, and what was Lee doing all the way out here? Aside from leveling any standing structure that happened to get in his way, that is. Well, whatever the case, Sasuke and Itachi Uchiha shrugged and shifted the massive crate they were carrying. Sakura waved a pair of glow sticks to guide them through the dusky gloom. Shouts and crashing noises sounded all around them. Are you sure you're okay with this, Sasuke? Itachi wondered idly. It's been years in coming, said Sasuke. It would have come to light eventually, anyways. I'm fairly certain this isn't strictly legal, though, Itachi said. Doesn't that worry you? Does it worry you? Sasuke replied. Itachi smiled. No, not really, he admitted. But I don't want you getting in trouble. It's an S-rank mission from the Lord Third Hokage, Sasuke said. As long as we don't get caught, it's fine. And in this mayhem? He gestured around them, to dilapidated old buildings collapsing in smoke and flame as Uzumaki and Uchiha alike spread through the district. We won't get caught. I guarantee it. Fine, if you say so, Itachi said, shrugging. Just making sure. Somewhere in the afterlife, Madara sneezed and scattered his playing cards all over the table. He scowled. Damn it, why does that keep happening? He muttered. The Shinigami smirked in response and confidently laid his own hand on the table. 3 of a kind, he said. Oh, that doesn't count, Madara snapped. The technically anthropomorphic personification of death simply gestured to the hoary old Uchiha's chips. A pair of Rinnegan rolled in weary frustration. Cheating bastard, Madara muttered. Look at the pot calling the kettle black. In response, Madara gave Death the finger. A week passed in the world of the living. People woke up in compromising positions all over the village. Hangovers abounded, and a good chunk of Konoha's infrastructure had been victimized by the rioting partiers. Many people were fined or incarcerated for crimes ranging from property damage to public drunkenness, to general indecency and disturbing the peace. Despite this, when the time came for the final phase of the Chunin exams to be carried out, everything was back to normal or near enough, with only a few changes occurring over the clean-up process. Like Itachi being cleared of the charges of high treason and returned, on probation, to the ranks of loyal Leaf Ninja. Or Tsunade, Jiraiya, and other assorted high-ranking Konohanin being court-ordered to attend psychiatric sessions and grief counseling. Or Danzo being forced to attend classes on remedial ethics, history, and politics, the first taught by Naruto, the second by Sasuke, and the third by Hinata, all under Henge. That last one was especially effective, after a few days' progress. But I digress. Apart from the twin family reunions of the Uzumaki and Uchiha, there was no event in Konoha this month which garnered more gossip, speculation, and friendly wagers than Phase 3 of the Chunin exams. Authorities and personages ranging from horse doctors to feudal lords were in attendance, princes and paupers alike gathering from near and far to witness a rite of passage and peerless blood sport. Chief among those assembled to witness these proceedings, the guests of honor whose votes would ultimately decide who advanced to Chunin and who did not, were the Yandame Kazekage and Sandame Hokage, Gold Dust Rakshasa and God of Shinobi, Raza of Suna, and Hiruzen Sarutobi. Also in attendance was a representative of Kyuzugaku's Jounin Council, but she was every bit as forgettably generic as Karen's teammates, except for a reasonably generous pair of eyes. And even that would only make her interesting to people who were interested in women in low-cut fishnets that showed off their very large, round, perky eyes. So Hiruzen and Raza, both heterosexual widowers who had each been single for over a decade, were naturally very interested in what she had to say in the sense that neither one of them actually heard a single word out of her mouth. She really did have very nice eyes. Genma Shirani was announcing. Hey to Yugao, and his other peers, as well as a number of civilians and foreigners, watched from the stands. The first match was Naruto Uzumaki vs. Gaara. No surname needed. Of the desert was more than sufficient, and even that much wasn't really necessary. Gaara was unique enough, both in the person who owned the name, and in the name itself. His parents came from a long line of eccentric baby namers. Naruto and Gaara walked into the arena. The latter eyed the former with a mixture of curiosity and something like fondness. Both of them took their positions. Briefly, Gaara thought of all the things Naruto had done for him. He'd never before met someone else who understood the struggles of being an outcast, and he was fascinated by the way Naruto had been able to overcome these hardships. I was just lucky enough to find people willing to acknowledge my existence for its own sake, Naruto had told him once over ramen, shortly after the end of the second phase. That's all. As long as there's even one person who cares about you, I think it just becomes a matter of grinning and bearing it whenever things seem bad. Once you have bonds of friendship or family or even rivalry to anchor you, it gets a lot easier to go out into the world without fear of being swept away or swallowed up in some faceless mass of humanity. You just have to know where to look for those bonds. He was strangely eloquent, that Naruto, despite his often coarse and informal mannerisms. Endearing, in that curiously charismatic way of his. Gaara felt himself smiling as he faced off against Naruto. Just a little. Shall we fight? In response, Naruto formed a ram's seal. His chakra spiked. He was enveloped in a puff of smoke. Oiroku no Jutsu. Gaara didn't see a thing. His sand rose up before him in a solid wall, screening his opponent the instant Naruto performed his technique. It blocked his view completely. He was thus more than a little bemused by the highly vocal reactions of the audience. Because from the stands there came a number of variously pleased, outraged, and disbelieving cries. Some leered at the buxom, naked blonde who appeared in Naruto's place. Others covered the eyes of their boyfriends, husbands, children, etc. Others still simply stared blankly, wondering if they'd somehow mixed up the Chunin exams with something else entirely. Naruto, for his part, was in sexy jutsu form for all of 3 seconds before a fist of densely packed sand flew into his face. A sooner rocket punch broke his nose and snapped his head back. His henge dispelled in a puff of smoke. Up with the other contestants, Sasuke shook his head exasperatedly. Damn it, Naruto, he sighed. Why do you always have to open with that stupid joke technique? It has its uses, Hinata hummed. And it's a nice show, too, added Sakura with a snigger. It's ridiculous, he insisted, huffing dismissively. You're just upset because at that time he used sexy jutsu in that game of chicken, aren't you? Sasuke blushed fiercely. That didn't count, damn it, he snapped. Whatever you say, dear, Sakura said with an insincere nod, giving him an annoying smirk. He glared petulantly down into the arena. I'm surrounded by perverts. Oh, you know you love it. For a second, Naruto staggered, a stream of blood flowing from his nostrils. The sand fist floated back, and it made a distinctly admonishing gesture before dissolving. It looked like that blow had actually stunned Naruto, at least for a moment. Then he laughed, and popped his nose back into place. Ah. Your mom is the sheltering type, I see, he mused, wiping the blood from his lip. Said Gaara, who was completely oblivious to Naruto's opening tactics, and began to wonder when the fight proper was about to start. Never mind, nothing important, Naruto muttered. Just a starting gambit. The first move is only ever a distraction, anyways. Gaara blinked. Wait, what? His sand only barely had enough time to swerve behind him and block a flying tackle from Naruto, right as he said this. The redhead stiffened in surprise when he heard the impact, and he felt several grains of sand knocked loose. Oh, he said slowly, looking impressed. I see that was fast. I didn't even hear you move. That's because I didn't, came Naruto's voice from in front of Gaara. He was standing in place, grinning like the cat that got the canary. He hadn't moved an inch. The weight on Gaara's sand shifted then, and Naruto's shadow clone spoke its piece. Bunshin Tatari Daibakuha. It was a very cool line to go out on, in the clone's opinion. But Gaara didn't react. After a moment's awkward silence, the Kage Bunshin's sweat dropped. You know, it added, detecting that its statement hadn't elicited immediate comprehension. Clone tackle great explosion. Gaara blinked. He connected the dots. Oh. Boom! A thunderclap shook the arena, rolling through the air as smoke, dust, and sand rose in a dense plume. The ground cracked and cratered, spiderweb fractures racing through rock and packed soil. There was silence as the smoke cleared. Slowly, Gaara came once more into sight. His sand had rushed to reinforce itself, forming a domed shield beneath Naruto's Kage Bunshin as it detonated. But the explosion had not been anticipated until the clone's chakra had already built to near critical mass, and even Karura's automatic defense had its limits. Cough, cough. Gaara hacked into a clenched fist, the remains of his sand shield crumbling behind him. His hair stood on end, and he was covered from head to toe in soot. The damage was superficial, purely cosmetic. Apart from his pride, Gaara wasn't wounded at all. But the fact that Naruto's attack had been able to get through his defenses at all, let alone so easily, still increased his respect for the blonde by a couple more notches. Then Naruto made a peace sign and gave a shit-eating grin. And despite his respect for the other boy, Gaara twitched. Please don't provoke me, he muttered. I'm trying to control my temper, but Shikaku is far less patient than I. Yeah, Naruto said, and your mom seems a bit pissy too. As fast as the earlier rocket punch, a hand of sand flew up and slapped Naruto on the cheek. His head snapped back. Wincing, Naruto rubbed the palm mark on his face. Yeah, okay, I deserved that one, he conceded. Mildly perplexed, but still intending to give this fight his all, Gaara gestured and sent a wave of sand at Naruto. It crashed toward him and rose up, a living wall of silicate granules threatening to bury the blonde alive. Your guard is wide open, said Gaara. said Naruto, looking up as a shadow stretched over him. Oh, right. The sand crashed down with a thunderous noise, and it heaped up in a large mound. Like having a good-sized sand dune dropped right on top of your head, it was. Or so Naruto assumed, at least. He was already several feet up in the air before the sand actually had a chance to engulf him, you see. Flipping end over end, the blonde performed a graceful aerial tumble. He landed easily a few feet behind Gaara, putting on a bit of flourish to really sell the maneuver. Not even turning around, with an almost absent-minded flick of the wrist, Naruto then sent a half-dozen shuriken whistling toward the back of Gaara's head. Obviously, a drift of sand snatched the darts out of the air before they could land, and Gaara languidly turned to face his opponent. My defense is fully automatic, if you haven't already guessed. He frowned. It operates independently of my will or perception. You can't deceive it or catch it off guard. Gaara swung his hand in an arc, and a fusillade of sun shuriken shot from the sand at his feet. A kunai appeared in Naruto's hand, and the blonde spun, fluidly parrying the missiles. Sand-throwing stars burst apart on cold iron, disintegrating into puffs of loose particulate. Granules floated in the air for a moment, and Gaara had started curling his hand into a fist to follow up, before Naruto formed the seal of confrontation and let out a sharp "Haya." The loose sand scattered, preemptively blasted away before Gaara could reshape it or manipulate it in another way, such as he did with his son Shigure. That sounds like a challenge, Naruto belatedly said, grinning. He cracked his knuckles, and it took Gaara a moment to realize that the blonde no longer had a kunai in his hand. A second after that, he noticed said gardening tool turned multipurpose weapon protruding from a tendril of sand inches from his shoulder. Gaara would have arched an eyebrow, if he had one. I can't tell if your technique is brilliant or sloppy, he commented. But you won't penetrate my defenses fighting at this level. Yeah, probably not, Naruto agreed. But I've already accomplished what I set out to do. Huh? Gaara stared uncomprehendingly at his opponent. Just wait a moment, Naruto said, looking like he was holding back the punchline to a killer joke. Gaara blinked. Wait. He could hear something. Was that chanting? Jayati Jayati Haare so Jayati Boji so Waka. The mound of sand behind him, the mound of sand he'd attempted to bury Naruto with earlier, suddenly exploded with a shrieking, booming, ringing sound. Or was the ringing just tinnitus? Well, it was very loud, either way, and shockingly abrupt. Naruto gave the startled and perplexed Gaara a smarmy grin. Wanna see something cool? He asked. Gaara blinked owlishly. I'll take that as a yes, Naruto muttered sotto voce, sighing to himself. More loudly, seemingly half for the benefit of the audience, he added, then look behind you. Only half consciously, the redhead turned around to do as Naruto suggested. Or as Naruto's shadow clone suggested, rather. Because Gaara saw what had to be the original Naruto standing in a crater that had been a dune the last time he'd looked, bearing orange markings around his eyes, irises colored a striking golden yellow that was visible even from this distance, and pupils shaped like horizontal bars. Like a goat's pupils. Or a frog's. Poof! Gaara heard the shadow clone dispel behind him. You didn't dodge my attack? He said, his brain taking a second to catch up to what he was seeing. Naruto grinned. Bingo! He said cheerfully. It hurt like a son of a bitch, but I've tanked much worse. He cracked his knuckles. Now, though, how about I show off a bit? Sage chakra is kind of a tricky power to control, and I want to make sure I get my money's worth. Up in the stands, Jiraiya started crowing victoriously and bragging to any female who bothered to listen about how Naruto had learned this technique from him. Tsunade silenced the man with a death glare. Despite the very good points the representative from Kusa had been making on the economic disparities between their villages and the inherent flaws of Jiggle Jiggle Bouncy Wiggle and her people's daily struggles with boingy boingy boing boing, Raza somehow managed to tear himself away from those fascinating eyes long enough to notice that his youngest son was fighting. And he was almost drawn back into the hypnotically snug and sheer mesh of the grass kunoichi's so-called blouse before his brain properly registered what he had just seen down in the arena. Then Raza did a double take, completely forgetting about the intelligent, capable, and independent Kusa elite's simply magnificent eyes when he realized that Gaara was actually losing. What in the deepest rings of hell is this? He gaped. Hiruzen absently followed Raza's line of sight. He saw Naruto fighting Gaara, making a spectacle of completely trivializing the Suna Jinchuriki's absolute defense and formidable manipulation of sand. He recognized the markings around the youth's eyes, and identified the style he was using as similar to Jiraiya's frog kata. "Oh, it looks like your son is losing," said Konoha's Sandaime. "My condolences, Raza." Suna's Yondaime stared in disbelief. "What's going on down there?" he muttered. "Even my village's finest and most elite jounin would be hard-pressed to survive a battle against Gaara, yet this boy is." "A student of the copy ninja," Hiruzen promptly supplied. "Also recently a protege of my own pupil, Jiraiya. And I'm sure you'll recognize that face, or at least the name Uzumaki." Raza balked. "Holy shit," he muttered, realizing that he had almost tried to invade this village, and seeing the individual who would have been the linchpin of the operation and Suna's secret weapon being completely dismantled by a bastard Uzumaki student of Kakashi Hatake and one of the Sannin. "Holy shit," he repeated, suddenly feeling immensely grateful for the anonymous tip-off that had first convinced him to reconsider those plans. Hiruzen smiled, giving off an unmistakable air of smugness. "This new generation shows a lot of promise, don't they?" he said, rubbing a bit of salt in the wound and calling it disinfectant. Raza nodded dumbly, letting out something almost like a whimper. The hidden grass representative, for her part, was simply glad that these two were no longer staring at her tits. They really weren't terribly subtle about it, for a ninja of their supposed caliber. It wasn't much longer before Gaara raised his hand and surrendered. Naruto had quite thoroughly shown his skill, repeatedly brushing aside his sand like it wasn't even there to give pointedly harmless taps on various vital points, dancing effortlessly in and out of the redhead's reach, and even shrugging off a sand coffin at one point. It was a completely one-sided exposition, though not mean-spirited on Naruto's part. Gracefully, Shikaku's accepted defeat. Shikaku himself was oddly quiet as he did this, with only a few short mutters of damned sneaking foxes floating around in the back of Gaara's head. But whatever the case, Naruto shook Gaara's hand after their match, and they left the arena floor to rejoin their fellow competitors. Funnily enough, the next fight, Shikamaru vs. Temari, was the same matchup as the first time around. And it went about the same as well. Basically. Not exactly the same, but close enough. It was, in spirit, the same as their fight in the original timeline. The tactics they used were different, at points, though employed towards similar ends. Temari's perceptiveness and analytical prowess enabled her to dissect Shikamaru's jutsu and figure out its limitations, and she skirted the edges of his range. Shikamaru, in response, employed a variety of methods to extend his reach or trick Temari into coming within range. It was a lengthy and deeply involved battle of wits, ultimately concluded via patience and sheer attrition. Like last time, Shikamaru eventually managed to catch Temari with his shadow, albeit through a different method, only to surrender at the last minute because his chakra was at its limit, and he didn't have any way left to finish the fight in his favor. Naturally, this incensed Temari, frustrated Ino, and impressed the ones actually responsible for deciding who got to be promoted. And the last one would be much to Shikamaru's dismay, when they eventually handed him a flak vest and congratulated him on making the cut. "How have things been going with your family, Hinata?" Sakura spoke up as the fight between Temari and Shikamaru began. She guessed it would take a while for the match to wrap up, and figured that now would be as good a time as ever for conversation. "I've been meaning to ask." "Oh, they're improving," Hinata said. She gestured vaguely. "Father and Niji-Nizan are still apprehensive around me, but they no longer jump or try to hide when they notice my presence. The others are much more at ease. Hanabi has been a darling, in particular." "Really?" Sakura said. "I'd have thought that hooking up with Tenten would have helped take Niji's mind off of you, even if it still seems weird to think of those two as a couple. But Lee and Karen are practically a surefire thing by now, so I guess there's nothing for it." Oh, I don't know if I would call them a couple. Hinata giggled. I think you may be overestimating Niji-Nizen's confidence in such matters. He's actually quite shy about romance and related subjects. Even before I faintly remember he was like that. She shrugged. Sakura hummed thoughtfully, looking sidelong at Naruto and Sasuke. The former was chatting animatedly with Lee and Karen, who had gravitated together, while the latter lazily fended off Ino's flirtatious advances. Poor girl thinks she still has a chance with him, Sakura mused ruefully, feeling sorry for her friend. I'll have to introduce her to Sai at some point once this is over, after I've made sure he's at a minimal level of social competence, at least. Then the pinkette turned her attention back to Hinata, smirking, and gave a wry remark. So, nothing like you were then. Hinata laughed. Fair enough, she said. I suppose that's simply a trapping of such traditional upbringings. I suppose it's fortunate that Naruto and I chose to raise our own children in a more modern fashion, as it were. Hinata didn't need to say this last bit out loud for Sakura to catch it. It could be seen on her face, in the slight tilt of her lips and smoothing of her brow, the way she stood and set her shoulders. We'll see them again soon, Sakura said, patting the other girl on the shoulder and giving her a confident and reassuring grin. I'm sure of it. Hinata smiled, quietly grateful for this. Shikamaru is doing quite well for himself, she said, changing the subject. No kidding, right? Said Sakura distractedly. I mean, a wife like he's got, well, that's the kind of woman a girl could go by for. I was referring to his fight, actually, Hinata said, her cheeks pinkening just a tad. But yes, Temari-san is a very lovely woman. Off to the side, Shino cocked his head curiously for a moment, overhearing the pair's comments. After a few seconds of consideration, he concluded that they were sharing some manner of inside joke. The matchups had been announced a month ago, after all, and the girls in his age group sometimes seemed to have a slight obsession with matchmaking. No offense intended, of course, Sakura added offhandedly. You're very pretty yourself, Hinata. But Temari, oh, she is a tiger. I think Ino might have a certain something like that as well, Hinata remarked, smiling indulgently, and shaking her head in something like amused exasperation. And Naruto's no jutsu too, of course. Shino's sweat dropped, listening to the continuation of this discussion. Or maybe they were just perverts. Well, of course, Sakura said, nodding in agreement. But that's still Naruto, when you get down to it, so it kind of defeats the point. Which is? What girls you'd consider going by for, of course. Oh, so like in my book, Hinata said. That's right, Miss Aika Wurudo. Sakura smirked. Just like your book. Eki to Hentai no Monogatari, wasn't it? She winked. Hinata laughed. Well, it's one thing to explore fantasies in the written form, Hinata said, smiling. But by your logic, the only time I ever really experimented doesn't even count. Oh? So what we shared meant nothing, eh? Sakura winked. That's entirely different, Hinata said airily. It was just for show. Maybe on your end, Sakura teased. But as for me, I put it all in. The pair of them broke down in vaguely perverted giggles. Pinching the bridge of his nose to stem a sudden spurt of bleeding, Shino decided to find somewhere less dangerous to stand. Like next to Naruto and Sasuke, who had apparently gravitated back together while Hinata and Sakura were talking, lost in their own little world. So Sasuke, Naruto said, watching the proceedings in the arena. Haku, Suigetsu, and me. Kill, marry, or fuck? Sasuke arched an eyebrow. All guys? He drawled. And you too? Last time we did it all girls, you refused to play. I did not refuse to play. I just refused to play by your rules. Naruto rolled his eyes. They're not my rules, they're the rules. You can't choose to kill all of them. Then don't make a list composed solely of my most insufferable former fangirls, Sasuke retorted. Bah, whatever, Naruto grunted. He waved a hand dismissively. What's your answer? If it helps, you can pretend the person in question is using sexy jutsu. Sakura type? Whatever helps you sleep at night. That's easy then, Sasuke said. Kill Suigetsu, marry Haku, and fuck you. Really? Naruto said. Marry Haku? Sasuke shrugged. How about you? He said. Man, that's no problem, Naruto said. Fuck Haku, marry Suigetsu, and kill the other me because it would have to be either a shadow clone or an evil twin bent on world domination. Sasuke hummed and nodded thoughtfully. This was about the point when Shino contemplated giving up on humanity. And that disillusionment would last right up until his secret pen pal from Taki sent him a picture of herself 2.5 weeks later. Fuchan was strikingly pretty, if also rather ambiguously boyish. Meanwhile, down in the arena, Genma belatedly announced the victor. It had taken him a moment to process Shikamaru's forfeit. Temari will proceed to the next round, he declared. The girl was reasonably pleased at this, despite the hollow feel of her victory right up until she realized this meant that, in the next round, she'd be fighting the guy who had managed to defeat Gaara without breaking a sweat. And then she briefly, desperately wondered if it wasn't possible to somehow override Shikamaru's forfeit with one of her own. Sadly, Genma said that wasn't how it worked. So she was screwed, and only just old enough to muse that it wasn't even in the fun way. Will Rock Lee and Hinata Hyuga please come down? Itachi, seated awkwardly close to Hayashi and his family, watched the Hyuga clan's heiress and Might Guy's disciple stroll down into the arena. The raven-haired Uchiha fidgeted, feeling uncomfortable in his new flak vest. It seemed unutterably bizarre to think that he was once more properly a shinobi of Konoha, if technically on a probationary basis. Saname-sama, it turned out, knew about the time travelers, and had heard the story straight from the horse's mouth. None other than Naruto Uzumaki had filled the Lord Hokage in. And Naruto had done this immediately after Sasuke told Itachi everything. He had apparently only forestalled telling the Hokage for that long solely so that he, Itachi Uchiha, could be the first one to learn the truth. That was awfully humbling, in a way Itachi could not quite explain. But it seemed that, because of Naruto's words and actions, Lord Sarutobi had decided that Itachi would be more useful in the village. And the aftermath of the reunion, which became something like a riot and a rave in one, spilling out into the streets and causing more havoc and mayhem than an Aburame chef during a health inspection, had provided the perfect excuse for the third Hokage to claim that new evidence regarding the Uchiha massacre had been uncovered, documents found in a theretofore unknown meeting place under a certain shrine in the old clan district. Documents which detailed the Uchiha clan's plans to carry out a coup. These documents had actually been stored in an undisclosed location known only to the Hokage and his advisors, having been covertly removed from the Naka shrine by Itachi himself immediately following the massacre, then redistributed into the ruins of the Uchiha district by the same and his brother during the chaos of the reunion. But the public didn't need to know that. All they had to know was that these documents gave the Hokage reason to believe that Itachi Uchiha may have been acting on what he perceived as his duty as an ANBU captain, as the official declaration had gone, and that Hiruzen subsequently had Itachi apprehended by Hunter Nin, picked up by his not-so-baby brother, and brought before the Hokage and a jury of his peers to answer for his actions. In actuality, it was a reverse kangaroo court handpicked by the Sandaime to absolve Itachi of any extraordinary legal blame for the massacre beyond circumventing the chain of command and acting outside his authority in dealing with a potential threat, for which he was stripped of his ANBU rank and demoted back to Chunin. A slap on the wrist so blatant that anyone with a hint of savvy would be able to guess at what it meant. But that was fine, so long as it didn't have to be outright confirmed that the village leadership had secretly ordered a 13-year-old boy to kill his own family. Some things were just better left unsaid. Hinata greeted Lee with a nod and a smile. He gave a terse if earnest half-bow in response, bending at the waist before snapping right back up and assuming a fighter's stance. Today is a good day to do battle, Lee said, smiling. The sky is clear and boundless, as vibrantly blue as the spirit of Konoha's green beast. A statement which really did not translate all that well into English. His basic meaning got across just fine, though. It's a lovely day, indeed, Hinata agreed. The sun shines down on all creation. Fluidly, easily, she slipped into a stance. Her palms were open, and veins swelled visibly outward from pale, pearlescent eyes. Even the eyes themselves bulged, in places, with a drastically increased flow of blood and chakra. A civilian viewing an active up close would likely feel at least a hint of nausea at the subtly gruesome view. It looked unhealthy, even painful, like the eye was seconds away from messily exploding out of its owner's sockets. Lee's only response to the sight was to smile a little wider. I am excited to trade blows with you, Hinata-san, I must admit, he confessed, still in the starting position. A master of the gentle fist, a prodigy of whom even Niji is fearful and overawed in a clan of elites and geniuses, you might just be the most outstanding of all. He gave a thumbs up and smiled. I was able to beat Niji in the second stage. Now we shall see how I stack up against you. You flatter me, Lee-kun, Hinata said, softly shaking her head. I am no genius. I have simply pushed myself to improve every day, little by little, until I could stand at the side of the one I admire. You, as well. I respect your determination and your talent. She lowered her stance, narrowing her eyes almost imperceptibly. But I will not lose here. And this statement opened the floodgates. Both competitors erupted into movement, blurring nearly out of sight from the perspective of the various untrained civilians and nobility, though most ninja were worth their salt could still follow them. It was barely half the speed Lee had demonstrated against Niji in the second phase, although the more perceptive observers among those who had witnessed that fight would be quick to notice that Lee was still wearing his weights. Either way, it was an impressive showing for competitors so young. Lee and Hinata exchanged deflected blows, dodging or blocking every maneuver their opponent pulled out, so far. Punch, parry, kick, duck. Roll and pounce, zig and zag. After 20 seconds or so of this relentless taijutsu, both parties broke off and put on some distance. I notice you have only used the most basic forms so far, Hinata-san, Lee observed, still smiling. He breathed with marginally more effort than he had before the fight started, although he wasn't showing any signs of a sweat breaking out just yet. So have you, Hinata replied. And you are holding back in other ways, as well. If you consider me stronger than Niji Nizan, then you should come at me with more speed and power than you used against him. I do not wish to end this fight so quickly, Lee said. Hinata smiled. My, you're very confident, Lee-kun, despite knowing that I'm also holding back. So it comes down to a matter of who is holding back more, does it not? Lee said. Strategy is all well and good, but without the skill and power to back a plan up, it will amount to nothing. Shikamaru-kun's match showed as much. Did it now? Said Hinata. I wonder about that. Lee clenched a fist, grinning from ear to ear. Whatever the case, he said, this fight will come down to a clash of fists, and a youthful contest of strength. My blood boils in excitement. Then Lee stepped out of his weights. That was the only practical, wieldy way to describe the fancy bit of footwork he used to get the things off his legs without bending over to manually undo them. Presumably, this was a trick Guy had taught him during the month of training. And he wasn't finished yet either. Show me the full limits of your strength, Hinata-san, Lee shouted. Hold nothing back, as I shall not hold back either. His chakra flared, the ground cracked. Veins bulged, and his skin turned a vivid red. HRNGH fifth gate of closing open. An explosion of power emanated from his position. Instantly, Rock Lee vanished, a considerable crater blown out from where he had just been standing. Without missing a beat, Hinata turned and raised her hands. Almost unceremoniously, outstretched fingers jabbed into Lee's body. He ran straight into her counterattack, and Hinata followed up with a quick and ruthlessly efficient combo of gentle fist strikes, halting the youth in place. Zeshu, Hashiman Hagiki, she said. It was a technique Niji had developed to counter Lee's Hashiman Tanku in another time. The inner gates closed. Lee's skin paled, returning to its normal shade. He collapsed bonelessly into the dirt, stunned and disabled. Whwa? Lee stammered, struggling to process the sheer abruptness of this turnaround. My apologies, Lee-kun, Hinata said, respectfully bowing to her defeated opponent. You asked me to fight you seriously, but this was the most I could do without risking serious injury to your person. I'm sorry. Lee stared at Hinata for a long moment. Then he laughed. I cannot begrudge defeat at the hands of such an honest foe, he remarked. Very well. I accept this loss. Hinata smiled, even as a gobsmacked Genma stopped gaping long enough to shake his head and announce the fight's outcome. Would you like any help leaving the arena? She inquired. Lee smiled, lying motionless on the ground, unable to so much as lift a finger. That would be much appreciated, yes. Kya! Hinata Onisama! Squealed Hanabi, unable to help but jump and cheer for joy over her sister's resounding victory. So cool! Normally, Hayashi would have gently but firmly reprimanded his daughter for behaving in such an unseemly manner, but he was presently too busy trying to decide whether he felt more proud or terrified of Hinata. On one hand, the girl had been a perfect angel for nearly half a year. She had given no further signs of instability or resentment. If anything, she seemed more well-adjusted now than ever. But on the other hand, he could still remember the aftermath of the massacre, and seeing firsthand how easily his daughter took down an opponent who was supposedly capable of utterly crushing Niji. Well, naturally he felt a bit of apprehension. And Niji, sitting next to his teammate Tenten, sighed wearily. Wow, said Tenten, giving a low whistle. Hinata is something else, isn't she? No wonder I couldn't beat her. She is terrifying, Niji murmured with complete sincerity. Oh, sure, Hinata had been perfectly nice and sweet and never raised her voice or made any move to strike him, but Niji had spent the last decade living in paranoid fear and resentment of the main house. He was sure that the instant he lowered his guard, she'd snap and murder him for looking at her funny. And that would be the end of it. But then Tenten giggled, interrupting Niji's rumination. Seriously? She said, looking at her teammate amusedly. I know she's strong, but terrifying? Hinata's the sweetest little thing I've ever seen. She wouldn't hurt a fly. Niji twitched. You haven't seen everything, he grumbled. Maybe, said Tenten, but I've seen enough to know that Hinata loves her cousin like a brother. She elbowed Niji in the ribs, grinning in that annoyingly smug and knowing way of hers. Niji felt his cheeks grow warm. And Itachi shifted awkwardly in his seat, overhearing all this. Karen ran up to Lee and took him off Hinata's back. Curtly and testily, she thanked the Hyuga for her help, before carrying her boyfriend off to the side. Bite me, she told him bluntly, determinedly. His head was in her lap. Despite his usual impulsiveness and exuberance, Lee simply stared at Karen for a moment before blushing. He hesitated. Right here? Right now? He asked her, uncertain. A beat. Karen blushed in turn, realizing how her request had sounded. And then not like that, you knucklehead, she snapped, flustered. I mean here, just bite my finger. I can give you some of my chakra that way. It'll heal you, at least a little. Lee's blush deepened. Oh, he said. So, it is not like you want me to. He trailed off, visibly embarrassed. Clearly, despite his serious and earnest demeanor, Lee was not entirely immune to drifting down the gutter. It was not a sign of perversion, perhaps, so much as simply an indicator of healthy hormone levels for a youth his age. He was 14 going on 15, after all. Karen herself was 13 going on 14. Girls reached physical maturity a bit sooner than boys, so she and Lee were at very roughly comparable stages of development. Aside from that, she was also a bit of a good old-fashioned pervert, if still a little more innocent than not. So she blushed as well, at the implications of Lee's mistaken inference, and nervously coughed into her fist. Right, she said. I just want to heal you. No perverted ulterior motives here. Weakly, Lee nodded. He afforded his unlikely girlfriend an apologetic smile, and opened his mouth. Karen gulped and offered him her finger. Gingerly, he bit it. And, red-heart, Karen moaned, sounding terribly indecent. Lee started audibly sucking her digit. In response, Karen arched her back, blushing, eyes squeezing shut. Her slender frame was racked with shudders. Oh, Lee Redheart. Most of the other competitors were conspicuously trying not to stare. Cough, cough. Very awkward. You look good, Ino. Those words came from Sakura, the blonde's opponent, as they headed down into the arena. Miss Yamanaka tried to take this compliment at face value, in as platonic and inoffensive a sense as she could imagine. Her mind threatened to run away from her, though, particularly as memories from the first stage of the exams resurfaced. Sakura was a surprisingly good artist. If she focused on that aspect, Ino reasoned, thinking purely of the composition and quality of the sketch, then maybe she could trick herself into forgetting the subject matter. Hell, even as long as she focused more on the remembered depiction of what could only be an adult Sasuke behind that similarly adult Sakura, it would probably be okay. Just so long as she willfully ignored the fact that the sketch Sakura had also been doing some very NC-17 things to a similarly drawn adult Ino. And just so long as she ignored the twinkle in her longtime rival's eye. "So do you, Sakura," Ino said in a tensely diplomatic sort of way. She saw the light of the arena entrance growing larger as they approached. It was not much longer now before they were out in the open. Before it was time to fight. Sakura smiled. Her lips didn't actually part, but still the grin felt unnervingly like it was all teeth. Uncomfortably predatory. "She's just trying to psyche me out," Ino told herself, suppressing a shudder. "Calm down, girl. It's not like she's actually." "I like that skirt on you," Sakura continued. "It's nice. Very short." She looked downward in a manner that left Ino feeling dirty, and not at all confusedly giddy. "No, not one bit, she would assure you." Ino gulped as they stepped out into the arena. "Well," the blonde said. "That's, nice?" "Very nice," Sakura purred. Emerald eyes gleamed in a way that screamed danger. Danger! In the back of Ino's mind. Anxiously, the Yamanaka heiress hurried to the starting position. Can I have some fries with that shake?" Ino whimpered and spun around. Sasuke sighed, watching his wife/girlfriend/teammate tease her opponent down in the arena. His Sharingan was active, and he could read her lips perfectly well. "That woman," he sighed. "Damn you and those Ika novels for corrupting her," he muttered, glaring at Naruto and Hinata. "She was corrupt from day one," Naruto replied. "We just weren't savvy enough to see it back then. I'm sure our writing didn't awaken anything that hadn't already been present in her subconscious," Hinata added. It was generally accepted, within certain literary fan circles, that Chikyu was the seventh Hokage's nom de plume, used when he wrote for the Ika series. Much less known was the fact that this pen name was actually an umbrella pseudonym for both Naruto and his wife. Pretty much only their closest acquaintances knew this much. Sasuke scowled, huffing irritably. He really was surrounded by perverts. "Megan, Sayuri Ryuren no Jutsu," Sakura intoned, weaving her hands together the instant Genma told them to start. "Sakura to Akazakura no Mai." Before she could even react, Ino found herself enveloped in a swirl of illusory cosmos and cherry blossom petals. A soothing fragrance filled her nostrils, a sweet floral perfume that caused the tension to melt from her frame like butter on toast. On an intellectual level, Ino realized this was a genjutsu. She could have told as much just from hearing the name of the technique. Demonic illusion, art of profusely blooming lilies, dance of the cherry and cosmos. It was a real mouthful of a name, and honestly a bit pretentious sounding. But genjutsu was genjutsu, and she should probably break out of it before anything too weird could happen. Try not to think about the implications of that name, she told herself. She wove her hands together in a basic seal. "Release!" Ino shouted, fluctuating her chakra even as the scenery around her became more idyllic. A flowering meadow on a sunny day, tall grass and colorful blossoms amidst which frolicked and cavorted many laughing. Naked. Oh dear. Ino felt like her face didn't know whether it wanted to pale or redden. After a few seconds, it settled for a color that matched her outfit a little too well. Weakly, she again tried to scramble her chakra and dispel the illusion. It didn't cause more than a slight hiccup in her surroundings. Like a reel of film skipping a frame or two. She swallowed, staring at a meadow filled with lookalikes of herself and Sakura ranging in apparent age from her present 13 to full-grown adults. All very attractive, very naked, and very much enjoying themselves. Whimpering, Ino tried again to dispel the illusion. "Release!" she grunted, gritting her teeth. One of the Sakura lookalikes, one that was her age, smiled at Ino and started to walk closer. She walked far too confidently for someone that scrawny, and yet Ino found herself staring and blushing undeniably in spite of herself. The genjutsu Sakura winked at her. Blew a kiss. A shiver raced up Ino's spine, and she decided for the sake of her own sanity to interpret it as disgust rather than anything else. Release, she squeaked. Dispel. Kai. Sakura was inches away. Fingers brushed the back of Ino's hand. Yeek, she squealed. Let me out of here. Sakura smiled at Ino. Her face came closer. Chew. And suddenly Ino didn't care anymore. Back in real time, Sakura watched her frozen opponent standing motionless under the spell of her genjutsu. Ino's cheeks were growing increasingly red. Almost crimson. Sakura smiled at Ino, counting down on her fingers. 3, 2, 1. Blood erupted from Ino's nostrils, and the blonde collapsed on her back. There was a dreamy expression on her face. She was out like a light. Genma-san? Sakura prompted, turning to the referee. The man blinked, realizing that the fight was over. Well, that was quick. Genjutsu battles were some of the most gripping and surreal kinds of shinobi combat out there, a thrilling struggle of wills and cunning where the world was warped and bent and reimagined in strange and horrifying ways for the participants. But from an onlooker's perspective, they tended to be dreadfully boring, with combatants standing stock still for minutes at a time and not seeming to do anything. Oh, right, Genma said. Ino is unable to fight, so the winner is Sakura. There was only a light smattering of polite applause from the shinobi in the audience. No civilians joined in. Sakura grinned smugly, regardless, and took a bow. I wonder what kind of genjutsu that was, Kurenai hummed to herself. She was seated next to Asuma in a way that totally wasn't suggestive of the two of them dating or banging or sharing any kind of relationship aside from a perfectly professional cordiality between old comrades. They insisted. Of course, this wasn't fooling anyone. I'm not sure I want to know, Asuma said, sweat dropping. Considering what I know of Ino, and how she reacted to it, well, I'm really sure I don't want to know. Oh, they're only kids, Kurenai chuckled. How perverted could it possibly be? Do you remember what we were like at that age? Asuma deadpanned. Kurenai thought for a moment. I know you and the boys were all horny little perverts, she said with a facetious seriousness. But me and my fellow girls were perfectly pure and chaste angels. This elicited a snort from Asuma. He laughed. Ha! That's a good one. My wife is a goddamn pervert, Sasuke miserably sighed, his fist pressed against Naruto's. You say that like it's a bad thing. Naruto laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. What, you never enjoyed a little something in the bedroom? I know Sarada sure as hell didn't pop out of thin air. Sasuke shot Naruto with a withering glare. The blonde twitched. Well, she didn't. Right? I refused to comment. Naruto rolled his eyes. Whatever. You're up next, you know. Against Karen, too. He gave his teammate a look, smirking. Try not to get too touchy-feely, alright? God damn it, Naruto. How many times do I have to tell you she wasn't my mistress? Until it stops being funny. Sasuke gave Naruto the finger. Karen stared off against Sasuke in the arena, her expression one of determination. She was tense, coiled like a spring, and ready to pounce at a moment's notice. Dark red eyes were smoldering like coals, and she clenched and unclenched her fists. Sasuke mimed a yawn. You know the rules, Genma said, nodding to the two competitors. Just try not to kill each other too hard, okay? Karen glared daggers at Sasuke, and she nodded tersely. I make no promises, she growled. Does it even need to be said by this point? Sasuke wondered, sniffing dismissively. Lethal force won't be necessary in this fight. Karen's glare intensified. Genma gave her a wary look and stepped back. If you say so, the Jounin muttered. Collecting himself, he swung a hand down. Begin! A kunai appeared in Karen's hand the instant Genma signaled for the match to start, and she darted at Sasuke with frankly impressive speed for a ninja whose most valued assets had always been intelligence and support skills. There was something of a rabbit alley cat in the ferocity of her movements. She was quick and relentless, swiping viciously at her foe. Sasuke was mildly bemused by the sheer violence of her onslaught, even as he nimbly dodged and sidestepped her slashing strokes. His irises were black, sharing and presently inactive. He didn't need his to keep up with an assault of this level. Impressive as it was for what he knew of Karen, he was still easily the second strongest human in myth or history. Did it even need to be said? Sasuke had surpassed the Sage of Six Paths at the age of 17. Even if this had only been temporary at the time, merely a product of hijacking the Bija and using their chakra to supercharge his jutsu, he had eventually managed to reach that level again. Only legitimately this time, through hard work and training. Sasuke's ability dwarfed even that of his most powerful ancestors, Indra and Madara, and in terms of straight-up combat Karen was merely average. For a genin, she would have had to be at least as powerful as Kagaya to stand any serious chance of beating Sasuke. Needless to say, Karen didn't stand a chance. Adamantine sealing chains. Or at least, she shouldn't have. But Naruto had apparently been giving the girl some pointers from his mother's book, so to speak. Sasuke had been focused on dodging the blade more than pride would permit him to say, and Karen had actually managed to blindside him with her. Sasuke grimaced, feeling the Uzumaki chakra chains wrap around his form. It was a thoroughly unpleasant sensation, and not just because it suppressed his chakra far more than he was comfortable with. His arm was strapped down to his side, unable to move. "Well, this is inconvenient," he muttered. Sasuke looked at Karen. Her face was red, and sweat beaded down her brow. She was panting a bit, clearly having exerted herself a good deal to manifest these chains. Then she moved forward and went behind him, tightening her grip. She raised a kunai to his throat. "I'd call it a lot more than that, if I were in your position," she said. "You might as well surrender now. I don't want to hurt you." "It is a very snug fit," Sasuke hummed. "But are you sure you don't want to hurt me? You seemed pretty eager a minute ago." He wiggled the stump of his left arm, which protruded awkwardly from the binding chains. Karen pressed the blade a little closer. "Just shut up and surrender," she growled. Up with the other competitors, Karen's teammate rubbed his eyes. He stifled a yawn, looking rather sluggish as he watched his teammates fight. Idly, he scratched his wrist, brushing off a tiny insect. "She's gonna win," he said. "Go, Karen-san!" Lee cheered. "You can win!" "She already has it in the bag," Temari drawled. She gave Lee a pointed look. "And shouldn't you be back with your friends? Somewhere else? Anywhere other than here?" Lee smiled obliviously. Sakura chuckled, a little ways away, resting her elbows on the railing. "They're underestimating him," she observed. "That's disappointing." Hinata smiled at Naruto, nodding in response to this remark. He inclined his head, in turn, and gave a toothy grin. "He's annoyed with himself," the blonde commented. "Ticked off that he got caught in a trick like that. I think he's about to pull out a few of the stops." "No, I don't think I will surrender." Sasuke said this blandly, tonelessly. His Sharingan activated, progressing to its highest level. Not that his opponent could see this. "What?" Karen said, bemused. She scowled and pressed the knife closer to his throat. It traced a thin white line below his Adam's apple. "Do you think this is just an empty threat? Don't try me, Uchiha. These are life or death fights until the referee intervenes. Anything goes." "It's not a matter of intent, honestly," Sasuke said, shrugging. "Simply capability." He waved a hand airily. Karen took a moment to register this gesture, mostly because she knew his arm was restrained at his side. He couldn't go around waving his hand with it pointed to his waist. In the second it took her to process the impossibility of what she had just seen, Sasuke grabbed the kunai with his bare hand and wrenched it away from his throat. Effortlessly, he twisted the knife around and held it to Karen's throat, easily tearing it out of her grip. Using his left hand. The left hand he shouldn't have had. You know, everyone always asks me why I never bothered to have my arm reattached, or get a prosthetic, Sasuke said in an almost conversational tone, somehow managing to seem both nonchalant and threatening despite the fact that he was bound in chains of chakra. Usually, I tell them it's for sentimental, philosophical, symbolic reasons. And while that is certainly true. He grinned. Karen could hear the smile in his tone, even if she couldn't actually see his face. It also comes in handy at times like this. Another hand grabbed Karen, an arm wrapping around her. But Sasuke's right arm was still bound at his side, and he shouldn't even have a left arm. So what the fuck was going on? Azurapath, Sasuke said, as though answering the unspoken question. Shirada. It's one of my more interesting powers. Quite handy for getting the drop on enemies. Belatedly, Karen realized that the hand holding the kunai to her throat was attached to an arm where there should have been only a stump, and the arm grappling her was protruding from the top of Sasuke's right shoulder, above the actual arm. Then her chains started to dissolve. Within seconds they were gone. Huh, Sasuke said. So that counts as ninjutsu, eh? Well, that's handy. He shook his head and laughed, once. Predapath, he sighed wistfully. What would I do without it? He let go of Karen. The arm coming from his shoulder receded in a way that was subtly grotesque. She felt the urge to vomit at the sight. Devapath, Sasuke said next. Shinra Tensei. And suddenly Karen was flying through the air, wind tearing at her clothes. Her eyes went wide as Sasuke's form shrank away, right up until the point where she smacked. Thud. Into the arena wall. She didn't break anything, or at least it didn't feel like she did, but maybe that was just the adrenaline numbing her senses. Limply, she slid down to the ground. Feeling stunned and a little nauseous, Karen watched Sasuke slowly turn to face her. He had to be at least 10-15 meters away. Until he wasn't. She looked up, and saw him standing over her. That was too sudden for a body flicker, some remote and analytical part of her mind whispered. Sasuke hadn't moved a muscle. Unconsciously, Karen activated her mind's eye Kagura. She sensed Sasuke's chakra. Both what was on the surface and what was under that. I surrender! She immediately squeaked, her eyes going as wide as dinner plates. Half fear, half disbelief, all desire to get as far away from a fight with this guy as quickly as she possibly could. Sasuke nodded, and his left arm receded back into a stump. You made an impressive showing, he told her. Very few people could have put me in a tight spot like that. Despite her brief panic attack, Karen assumed that he meant very few people their age. Sasuke, of course, meant very few people, period. But she didn't need to know that. The winner is Sasuke Uchiha, Genma announced. Are you okay, Karen? Lee welcomed his girlfriend back into the waiting area, anxiously taking her hand. Does it hurt anywhere? Do you need a medic? Karen smiled at this concern. Some might have found such worry stifling, but she thought it was sweet, especially given Lee's usual mindset. He acted so gung-ho and hot-blooded most of the time that it was easy to forget about the polite and earnest young man that lay underneath the ridiculously intense training and constant shouting about youth, love, and perseverance. Lee was honestly a very serious, innocent kind of boy. He wore his heart on his sleeves, and was a strong believer in chivalry. Karen just hoped he wouldn't try to beat up Sasuke in retaliation for her defeat. While she had immense faith in her boyfriend's skill, and could have appreciated the gesture, there were some real monsters out there. I'm fine, she told him. The only thing I really hurt was my pride. No need to go avenging me, Lee-kun. He blushed. Ah, how transparent that boy was. Rock Lee was like an open book, a children's book with big letters, small words, and plenty of colorful pictures. Pretty much anyone with a hint of perception could read the guy. Maybe that was part of the reason she liked him. Lee was straightforward, uncomplicated. Simple. And Karen meant this in the nicest possible sense. Smiling, she gave him a hug. After all, she added, I don't think you'd want to see me getting into a fight with Hinata to avenge your defeat, would you? Lee's blush deepened. Inexplicably, images of the two girls wrestling in a manner quite contrary to any shinobi discipline flashed through his mind. He perceived faint concepts of torn clothes, heavy breathing, and red and sweaty skin. Unprofessional, undisciplined, wildly indecent. That was how he imagined them settling their score, for some bizarre and alien reason buried deep in his mammalian subconscious. The thought did not displease him, strangely. "You are right," he lied. "I would not." After this came Shino's match. It was very short, nothing really worth mentioning. Mainly because Shino had planted some Kikeicho on his opponent when the third phase began, and the guy was thus nearly drained of chakra by the time their fight started. The observers in the Kaiga box took note of this and chose to allow it. No rules had actually been outlined to ban sabotage, after all, and it was appropriately underhanded for a ninja. Underneath the underneath, and all that. Thus went round one of the final stages of the Chunin exams. Next up? Naruto vs. Temari. Hinata vs. Sakura. Sasuke vs. Shino. One of those fights was sure to be impressive. Probably. So, all three of your students have progressed to the second round. Well done, Kakashi. Might Guy gave his eternal rival a grudging show of respect from his point of view. To anyone else, it would have looked like his usual nice guy pose. It was the thought that counted, though. It's a shame about Lee's loss, Kakashi said. I understand he was your favorite. Favorite? Guy laughed. Please, Kakashi. No decent teacher would ever play favorites. I love all three of my pupils equally. Really? Kakashi gave Guy a disbelieving look. Because that's not how it looks from my perspective. Or literally anyone else's. What do you mean? Guy asked, giving him a genuinely baffled look. I simply give Lee the most help because he's the one who most needs that help. This time, he actually did perform his nice guy pose. Kakashi's sweat dropped. Well, at least I know that I don't play favorites, he muttered. In a strange timeline roughly 25 years ahead of this one, the sixth Hokage sneezed. Temari gulped a tad anxiously as she stepped down into the arena, facing off against her opponent. She did a good job of obfuscating her nerves with a show of mildly contemptuous disinterest, but those who knew her well would be able to see right through. Everyone had their tells, whether they knew it or not. Naruto knew Temari's as well as anyone short of her brothers and husband. Not that she knew that he knew. But even if Naruto hadn't had a fairly close acquaintanceship with Temari's future self, what with the woman being the wife of his advisor and right-hand man, he still had his empathic abilities which derived either from some aspect of his Uzumaki ancestry, his mastery of Kurama's chakra, or both or either. It was a little ambiguous, depending on who you asked. Still, Naruto could tell that Temari was more than a little tense as she took her place across from him in the arena. It didn't take a genius to work out that she was at least a little scared of him, after his defeat of Gaara. To him that seemed a little silly, but people were weird like that. So, Naruto decided to break the ice with the best method he knew. Step 1. Create a shit ton of shadow clones. Step 2. Have those clones perform a mass transformation. Step 3. Step 4. Profit. Reverse harem jutsu, Shikamaru style. Temari's first reaction was to stare blankly as a dozen-plus shadow clones transformed in puffs of white smoke before her eyes. Was this a joke? She misheard that, right? Yes, she had to have. No one in their right mind would seriously give their jutsu such a ridiculous name unless you counted the no jutsu this kid had used against Gaara in the first round, of course. But really, how many variations could one guy possibly have on a single technique? Temari got the answer to her question as soon as the smoke cleared. Hey babe. Want some sugar? Came the voice of her previous opponent in stereo. Lookalikes of Shikamaru and Nara winked at her and struck poses they presumably thought of as cool or seductive, rather thin wisps of smoke the only thing covering their shame. Well, she thought. At least two, apparently. One of the not Shikamaras blew her a kiss. Temari shuddered. Possibly more. Up with the other disqualified competitors, the real Shikamaru sighed. What a drag, he grumbled. Hinata and Sakura shared a smile and a laugh, amused as much by Shikamaru's prototypically his response as by Naruto's choice of jutsu. Sasuke, on the other hand, facepalmed. Lee, for his part, was largely nonplussed. Karen was simply trying not to imagine a Rock Lee version of that jutsu. Gaara-san had once more sprung up to block his view. And Shino furrowed his brow in mild consternation. That boy has a real obsession with his sexy jutsu, doesn't he? Tsunade said, shaking her head bemusedly. Jiraiya was listless and despondent in his seat next to her. I have no godson, he said in a dreary monotone. Tsunade snorted and gave him a punch on the shoulder, half friendly and half irritated. Oh, get over yourself. Haruna, the hidden grass representative with a name as bland and generic as everything else about her village, cocked an eyebrow. That's an interesting jutsu, she said. How many variations does he have, I wonder? Who cares? Raza said flippantly, still a little peevish over Gaara's earlier loss. I find his regular sexy jutsu to be more agreeable, personally, said Hiruzen as loftily as he could manage. Haruna smiled. Yes, that was a very interesting transformation as well. She hummed in what might have been appreciative recollection. The Hokage and Kazekage promptly developed matching nosebleeds as their imaginations ran away from them. Back down in the arena, Temari twitched. She closed her eyes for a moment, thanking her lucky stars for the smoke covering the private places of these henges. Then her eyes snapped back open, and she let out a low, dangerous growl. You damn pervert! Fluidly, menacingly, she drew her war fan and unfolded it to reveal all 3 moons. Kamaitachi no Jutsu! With a lone swing, Temari kicked up a terrible windstorm. In her fury she exerted more power, if less control, making several of the trees in the arena rock and sway from the force of the shrieking gust, despite failing to hone the gale into a proper flurry of keen edges. Like exchanging a sickle and chain for a meteor hammer, she smote the battlefield with sheer blunt force. Dust devils cavorted at the feet of the naked Shikamaru harem, dirt and particulate specks of matter picked up and tossed in a crashing, twisting torrent. Temari glared daggers, her chest heaving a touch more laboriously in its accustomed respiration than it ought to have. Glinting on a dusky brow, a single bead of sweat trickled down into her eye. She winced and blinked it away. Perhaps pouring so much of her chakra into that attack hadn't been the best idea. She should not have been breathing this heavily already. Maybe she'd spent more stamina in that first round than she thought. Blinking 3 more times in quick succession, Temari raised her eyes to assess the damage as the dust finally cleared. Said eyes then widened to their furthest limit, so much so that it took a conscious strain of effort to hold the lids apart. Temari gaped and nearly dropped her fan. Blood rushed to her face so quickly, and in such a quantity, that for a moment she fancied that either her cheeks would combust or her legs would buckle. Naruto's Shikamaru henge clones were still there, if a bit dusty. Only one significant change, it seemed, had occurred from Temari's wind scythe assault. The smoke was gone. An uproar burst from the audience. Smack! An irate Ino socked Shikamaru in the jaw. Gah! You exhibitionist! She raged, lashing out at the nearest available target in annoyance. Shikamaru winced and rubbed his cheek. What did I do? He whined. Ino reddened and punched him again, striking with more frustration than force. It's the principle of the matter, damn it! I don't want to look at you naked. Grah! She flailed inarticulately, grasping for some kind of actual words to use. Shikamaru sighed and rested his chin on his hands. Ugh, whatever. That's a lot bigger than I would have expected from your friend. Karui said this to Chuji, the 2 of them seated in the audience. Her teammates sat on either side of them, Samui next to Karui, Omoi next to Chuji. B was at the end, seated right next to the aisle. Omoi squirmed in his seat, looking self-conscious. It didn't take a psychic to figure out what had him so antsy. Samui had her eyes closed with her temples visibly bulging. It looked like she was counting back and forth between 1 and 10. He was perfectly nonchalant, like this was the kind of thing that happened every day. Chuji hummed and looked down into the arena. He squinted. Nah, Naruto's just embellishing. Karui gave him a look. And how would you know that? She asked. Not that there's anything wrong with knowing it. Chuji shrugged. Me and Shikamaru have been friends for years, he said by way of explanation. The Kumo quartet decided to take his word for it. Temari could see everything. Everything. Silently, slowly, her expression perfectly blank, the blonde raised one hand. Without flinching for even an instant, she bit through the callous pad of her thumb and drew a trickle of red blood. Kuchios, Temari whispered slowly. With a single mechanical swipe of her hand, she smeared that blood over the 3 purple moons adorning her fan. This, and a bit of chakra, was sufficient to summon her rarely seen familiar, Kamatari. White, small, and furry, the weasel clutched a scythe as large as his body. A handful of other phantasmal scythes floated around him, wreathed in a glow of chakra. I'll cut ya, said the weasel in an incongruously gruff voice. The wind mistress raised her fan. She seemed perfectly serene, with the exception of her eyes. Those glared daggers sharper and more perilous than any sickle she could summon, piercing through the shamelessly naked forms of the Shikamaru lookalikes. With a slow, steady exhale, she swung. Kurikiri Mai. It was a devastating attack. This was a jutsu capable of leveling entire swathes of forest at a point in time when most of Temari's peers would be lucky to knock down more than 1 or 2 trees in a single go, a standard of measurement that Naruto had once joked would make the first Hokage cry, even if it was remarkably effective. The Shikamaru doppelgangers were ripped to shreds before they could blink, and they burst into smoke almost instantly. Shrieking, slashing winds tore at the battlefield around Temari, gouging the earth and felling most of the trees in the arena. Paul Bunyan would have been proud. After a deafening few seconds of absolute hell, the jutsu wound down, spending its momentum. The air stilled once more, save for a light breeze that brushed over some of the fallen branches, rustling leaves. It took Temari a moment to notice something off about this scene. She looked around, frowning curiously. Naruto was nowhere to be seen. What? Where the hell could he have gone? She didn't slice him to ribbons, did she? An instant after thinking this, Temari felt an abrupt and distinctive sensation in her gut. Her insides seemed to float, suddenly, as though bereft for a moment of any hindering, burdening substance. It was a feeling she recognized, if only somewhat. It was the sensation of weightlessness that came in the seconds before a free fall. She couldn't feel the ground beneath her sandals. Woo? Temari started to say. Hands grabbed her ankles, snaring her legs from beneath, and she realized that she was being dragged into the earth. It swallowed her up like quicksand, in the blink of an eye rising up to envelop her legs, her stomach, her chest, her shoulders. Nearly before she knew what was happening, Temari was encased up to her neck in distressingly tight-packed dirt. And above her crouched the guilelessly grinning jackass who had just humiliated her. Headhunter Jutsu, a real classic, said Naruto Uzumaki, giving a V-sign that made Temari long to break free and punch him in that cocky bastard face. I guess that's another victory for me. Sorry, Temari, but you'd have to get up pretty early in the morning to beat this guy. He chuckled and looked up. Hey. That rhymes, sort of. Sorry, Temari. Hee hee. Temari glared at him in righteous indignation. I hate you, she hissed. You're not the first, Naruto said. And you won't be the last either, I'm sure. Lots of people hate me, but way more love me. Temari growled irritably. Twitching, she looked askance at the referee. Then a thought struck. Naruto had been right underneath her. You didn't look up my skirt, did you? She asked, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. A beat. 2 seconds passed. Of course not, Naruto said. You're a little too far on the young side for me. Temari scowled, unsure as to whether to be relieved, offended, or vaguely weirded out by this remark. Elsewhere in the arena, Genma belatedly dug his way out from underneath a rather hefty cedar. Seeing Temari buried in the ground and Naruto standing over her, he did the sensible thing and announced the match as a win in the boys' favor. Naruto would proceed to the next round, either the finals or the semi-finals, depending on the outcomes of the next two fights. Raza twitched up in the Kage box. His expression was a tad baleful, such that the Kusa representative inched tentatively away from him. I know I was largely expecting this outcome, after how handily the boy defeated Gaara, he said under his breath, almost a sigh. But still, this was just embarrassing. What? Said Hiruzen. The way he provoked your daughter into losing her temper and used the ensuing chaos of her jutsu to sneak up on her and launch a surprise attack from underground? No, Raza said. That was sound tactical thinking, even if the ease with which Temari rose to his bait was just a touch disappointing. No, I'm talking more about the fact that both of my children have lost to someone who seems obsessed with the most puerile of ninjutsu. I mean, really? It's appropriate though, in a way, Hiruzen mused. Kitsune have long been depicted as using such shape-shifting powers to trick and seduce humans. What was that? Raza looked up from his mulish brooding, distracted. Oh, nothing important. Hiruzen chortled. Raza frowned, seeming mildly perplexed. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Haruna's jaw dropped, the hidden grass representative quickly connecting the dots. Well, call me a monkey's uncle, she muttered, swallowing. Sandame smiled. The next match was highly anticipated by young lads and Lilicans alike, hoping to see a catfight. Everyone else was just excited to see the Hyuga clan heiress and Tsunade's youngest apprentice duke it out. Bets were placed, money changing hands all over the place. Expectations were high. It was sure to be a knockdown, drag-out slugfest, a real slobberknocker of a fight. Hinata Hyuga and Sakura Haruno faced off. They shared knowing smiles. While they had never been especially close in the academy, or as genin, in the latter halves of their lives thus far, the two of them had come to establish a certain bond as women suffering, at one point or another, from unrequited love. They came to share a camaraderie and mutual support for one another's affections, a shared understanding. Even if Sakura's initial motives had been less than entirely selfless, she'd still ultimately played a bigger part in convincing Naruto and Hinata to get together than just about any other single person. And Hinata had been immeasurably grateful for this, and had stood by Sakura in her own search for love, a close friend and confidant in lonely times. Ino, for how in sync she and Sakura were, was nonetheless admittedly not always the best at keeping secrets, or the most capable of understanding Sakura's troubles. In matters of love, when it came to her relationship with Sasuke, it was usually Hinata in whom Sakura confided, whose quiet strength and boundless patience she leaned on and borrowed to carry her through lonely years spent waiting for word from her husband. Hinata and Sakura got each other in a way that few people did, male or female. Let's make this a good show, okay? Sakura said. Our success hinges on making this look impressive. Yes, Hinata said, nodding. Let's. It began. Sakura's fingers danced through a quick sequence of hand seals. With a grin, she slapped a hand down on the ground. Earth style, mud wave jutsu. The ground rippled violently, concentric circles traveling outward from the point of contact. Like the surface of a pond disturbed by a pebble, compacted soil rose and fell in a classic waveform. Hinata jumped over the crest of the first wave, landing in the trough and kicking off. She cleared the next two in a single bound, landing on the rear side of the fourth wave. She formed a hand seal, and sparks crackled around her feet. She vanished in a blur of motion, and the ground stilled. Sakura was already weaving the seals for her next jutsu. Inhaling deeply, she focused her chakra. Cheeks puffed out, and she spat a formidable quantity of water in front of her. Water style, water wall. Flames blossomed before the wave, starbursts of red and orange impacting the fluid rampart. Hissing steam billowed, flame quenched, and water boiled. For an instant, Hinata's silhouette was visible in the cloud of vapor. Then the steam broke on one side, a dark figure leaping out too fast for its shape to discern. It swerved quickly, looking like it aimed to flank Sakura. Scoffing, the pinkette formed another seal and kicked the ground. A wall of hardened earth shot up, an immovable bulwark intercepting the figure's trajectory. She started running to one side, and more walls rose up to follow the first one, like a line of fortifications painted out in a castle building RTS. Another figure appeared in front of her, outrunning the wall. In the moment it slowed down while shifting its velocity, swerving on sandaled toes to face her with pale eyes. She saw that it was Hinata. Or maybe a clone, at least. Sakura cocked her arm back and curled her hand into a fist. Earth spear. Her skin darkened, like getting a considerable tan in mere seconds. She punched. Her fist passed Hinata's head. The flesh and blood blow didn't land, but the bow wave from her arm, the mere wake of her punch, was enough to knock the other girl off her feet. Hinata stumbled and fell into Sakura's body. There was a smile on her face. A shadow clone destabilized. In lieu of a harmless puff of smoke, it broke apart in forks of electricity lashing Sakura's body, coursing through her defensive jutsu like it wasn't even there. Damn, that's bracing, Sakura hissed, biting her lip. Her skin reverted to its normal shade, except that her face was a touch rosier than usual. She smirked crookedly. Are you trying to get me excited, Hinata-chan? She stepped to the side, and Hinata passed palm first through the air where Sakura's back had been a second earlier, a silent and cat-like pounce. Perhaps I am. Hinata smiled in good humor. That's one way to take an opponent out of the game, isn't it? A very unorthodox way. Sakura laughed. They spun. A fist came up with blinding speed, ripping through the air like an anti-tank round. Fluid and graceful, Hinata twisted her torso and sidestepped, a palm lancing out at the same moment. Sakura's punch clipped Hinata's midsection, and Hinata's strike grazed Sakura's shoulder. One staggered and coughed up a bit of blood-flecked spittle, pressing a hand to her gut and wincing. The other grimaced and flexed, clenching her fists stiffly and awkwardly, her arms' movements a bit clumsy. Meeting one another's eyes, they leaped back to gain distance, then snapped their hands together in a blinding series of seals. Both inhaled deeply, then exhaled at the end of their madra. Suetun, Suryuden no Jutsu. Sakura expectorated 10,000 drowned lungs worth of lung, an oriental WIRM of pure water. Its coiled length moved ponderously through the air, an elongated head coming down with jaws spread wide. Katon, Karya Endin! Hinata spewed a sea of flame, and from the inferno rose the visage of a terrible drake. It leaped up bearing fangs of yellow and orange, illusory eyes like deep red coals set into a spectral, sneering head. It was a clash of ninjutsu in the most ancient sense, two warriors shaping the elements to do their bidding, bringing their phantasmal arts to a head in a single, terrible stroke. Dragons of fire and water dueled with a cataclysmic roar of crackling flame and rushing current. Steam billowed. It enveloped the arena in a thick, searing cloud. Shizen took a moment to pick her jaw up off the floor. Her mouth was agape, and her eyes were open wide. Irika, next to her, was gawping at the spectacle of Sakura and Hinata's fight. Knuckles went bone white with the force of his grip on Shizen's hand, and she was returning the favor, ounce for ounce. Incredible, she breathed. I didn't think these kids were at such a high level. I'm not sure I could pull off that kind of ninjutsu. They're shoo-ins for Chunin, at this rate, Irika said, slowly shaking his head. At least as long as they don't make any serious tactical blunders. But it would take a lot of repeated, foolish decisions on their parts to fumble it by this point. Shizen nodded slowly, still a little in shock as she observed the scale of the pair's battle. You know, the crazy thing is I'd swear they're not even going all out, she muttered under her breath, her forehead crinkling and corrugating as she knitted her brows and pursed her lips. Irika did not miss this. Neither Shizen's words, nor what she observed. He caught both, and had to admit that she might have had a point, even as inconceivable as it seemed. But he wasn't sure he wanted to believe that. He simply wasn't ready to think that these kids were fighting at this level and yet still holding back. It was a little too scary to contemplate. Shinaro! Sakura's battle cry tore through the arena, and a slight figure could be dimly seen leaping through the steam. Scarcely more than a shadow to most of the observers, she struck the ground knuckles first. Hinata, her active and capable of seeing Sakura's chakra through the steam cover, handily dodged the attack. The earth, unfortunately, could not. Scattering, the cloud of steam exploded. It was blasted away by dust and shockwaves. At Sakura's feet, beneath her fist, the ground tore open. Rock shards and clouds of dirt sprayed through the air, solid earth buckling and fracturing around the rim of a newly formed crater. Hunks of soil and gravel ranging in size from small caliber bullets to minivans flew out from the epicenter of Sakura's brutal strike like the frag grenade from hell. Hinata spun on her heels, seeing a good deal of this ballistic debris headed right for her, and performed a flawless Kaiten. The shrapnel broke, or rebounded off of the defensive, and for a moment the swirling dome of chakra gouged the soil out in a crater to rival the impact from Sakura's punch. Wisps of ethereal light began to unfurl then, after a handful of seconds, and it dissipated. For a moment, Hinata seemed to be staring Sakura down. Then she stepped out of the crater and thrust both palms forward. Hack, Kuhakishu! A wave of pressurized air and chakra slammed into Sakura, and the pinkette had to roll with the attack to keep from being knocked down. She somersaulted backwards and ducked to minimize her profile. On your feet, Sakura. I know that wasn't enough to end this. Heh. Whoever said I was off my feet? Hinata smiled. With a flex of her inner power, she manifested a pair of ghostly lions' heads over her hands. Her body itself became enveloped in the aura of a dragon. Sakura, at the other end of the field, cracked her knuckles and tapped into her seal of 100 strengths. Arcane script unraveled from the diamond mark on her forehead, spreading to frame her face. The pinkette bit her thumb and weaved a quick and fairly familiar series of seals. In a puff of smoke, a mini Katsuyu appeared on her shoulder. Grinning, Sakura clenched her fists. Is it time already, Sakura-sama? The polite slug queried, addressing her summoner with the utmost respect. Yeah. Just like we practiced, okay? Katsuyu nodded. Her form glowed momentarily with chakra, but the luminescence quickly faded. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Sakura's irises turned a piercing gold. Dark red pigment bloomed around her eyes. Hell yes, she growled. Time to kick some Hyuga booty. Jiraiya inhaled with a sharp hiss, eyes nearly bugging out of his sockets. Spinning around to face Tsunade, he gaped at her smugly grinning face. I don't mean to be rude, but isn't that Sage Chakra? Yes, Tsunade said, smirking at her teammate. Yes, it is. You taught that girl how to use Sage Mode? Jiraiya repeated, at a loss. I didn't, no, Tsunade said. Katsuyu showed her the ropes. Jiraiya shook his head, slowly settling back into his seat. Wow. And she already has the hang of it, he whistled. Man, that boy really wasn't kidding about how strong his teammates were. If that girl was 10, 20 years older, she'd kick your ass? Well, yes. Probably. Jiraiya grinned. But I reckon I'd enjoy it, depending on what kind of a woman she grew into. Tsunade rolled her eyes. Incorrigible lek, she muttered. Jiraiya shrugged. I am what I am. Metsu Hadouken. An orb of deep indigo flame shot across the battlefield, as large as any Gakkaku and Uchiha had ever spat. Hinata threw the fireball with her hands, summoning it between the lions' heads through strength of chakra and force of will. Sakura flipped over the fireball, a graceful and acrobatic move that would have won her the perfect score at any civilian gymnastics competition. Deftly, she bounded and vaulted over subsequent waves of pressure and bolts of energy, elemental chakra flashing across the arena. They met in the center. An exchange of blows took place, swift and artful. Sakura's fists shattered the earth with every swing, embedding craters in the arena wall without even coming close to touching them. Hinata danced a perilous tango with her foe. The dragon aura absorbed the worst of the force from Sakura's blows, but it was still enough to nearly lay her out flat with every strike. Hinata's hands were a blur, springing to and fro. Palms struck, fingers jabbed, while twin lions followed her every movement. Sakura's closed, here and there, but the girl was clever and knew enough about anatomy to understand where she did not want Hinata hitting her, and mostly managed to protect those spots. Damn, that's one tough cookie, Sakura muttered, ineffectually smiting the brow of Hinata's dragon cloak. You're barely even staggering when I hit you. I know how to take a punch, Hinata said. But so do you, I must say. I am really not making much headway here. Hinata grazed Sakura's left arm, barely managing to stick out her thumb and jab it into another. Sakura drove a knee into Hinata's gut, and even through the defensive aura the Hyuga winced. "How much chakra do you think you have left?" Sakura asked, panting. "With how we've been burning through it?" Hinata said, beads of sweat scintillating beneath her chakra shroud. "Maybe half." "Damn," Sakura muttered. "I can't be more than a third full, myself. We'll have to really stretch to make this convincing." "You haven't tapped into the yang chakra yet," Hinata said. "I don't want to overpower you. Just end this in a draw." Sakura grinned crookedly. "Plus, I don't really like using that chakra for fighting. As long as I keep it in reserve solely for healing, I can sorta justify spending the rest of my chakra on big, flashy jutsu." Hinata smiled. "You just want to show off." "Don't we all?" Sakura laughed. "Besides, this was your idea, that is, ending the match in a draw so our husbands can fight each other on even footing. Or even-ish, at least." Hinata stepped back, and so did Sakura. The former's chakra shrouds dissipated. The latter's eyes went back to their natural color, the markings on her face fading. Katsuyu disappeared in a puff of smoke. Bullets of sweat fell in a torrential shower from their pores, uncountable beads of moisture slicking their skin and dampening their clothes. "Oof," Sakura panted, wiping some perspiration from her forehead. "Damn, I am going to freak out by the time we get back to the boys. This body really can't take the heat. Literally." Hinata nodded, looking a little woozy. "Shall we?" she said, moving into a marginally shaky stance. "Yes." Sakura grinned. "Let's." And they collided in one last exchange, a single blow each. Hinata landed a palm square to Sakura's sternum. Sakura drove a fist into Hinata's abdomen. Both coughed up a bit of blood. Then they swooned as one, collapsing backwards into the dirt. A dead faint, seemingly. Ginma poked his head out of the shelter he'd erected at the opposite end of the arena, constructed from the logs of the trees Temari had cut down in her rage at Naruto. "Is it over?" he wondered anxiously. A pause. He looked at Sakura and Hinata's seemingly unconscious forms. "Oh. Well," he said. "It seems this round ends in a tie." The audience cheered. Hinata and Sakura smiled. "Well," Sasuke said, "it looks like we'll be fighting each other in the finals, Naruto." "You don't know that," the blonde replied with a cheeky wink. "Shino's pretty good." Sasuke glowered. It was thoughtful of the girls, he said, stubbornly refusing to take the bait. Contriving to end their match in a tie like that. "Oh, you could tell?" Naruto hummed. "Yeah, it was a hell of a show." They were holding back. "Yeah, well, obviously. The arena's already looking pretty beat up from the last few rounds. If they didn't pull their punches, they might have brought the whole place down on everyone's heads." "Ugh. That's annoying," Sasuke muttered. "If we're going to fight, I want it to be a serious one. It's no fun if we can't cut loose a little." "Ah. You're sounding a little like Madara there," Naruto joked. Sasuke shot him with a death glare. Ino looked catatonic, staring down into the arena. "Holy shit, Sakura was that strong?" she said. "When? How?" "Looks like there's no shame in your loss," Shikamaru snarked. "If she's that powerful, then you couldn't have stood a chance to begin with. Right?" Ino scowled. "That's not the point," she snapped. "Sure it isn't," Shikamaru drawled. Itachi let out a low whistle, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Hayashi Hyuga, one row ahead and 2 seats over, had his hands folded solemnly in his lap. "I am convinced," said the Hyuga patriarch simply, steadily. "Our clan's entire system is bullshit." Niji couldn't help but smirk a little, overhearing this. Vindication had never tasted so sweet. Tenten, on the other hand, looked surprised to hear such an austere personage as Hayashi swearing. "What is bullshit, father?" Hanabi asked innocently, not recognizing the word. "Tradition," said Hayashi laconically, a response that would cause a few hilarious misunderstandings sometime down the road. Itachi eyed this scene bemusedly, then shook his head. It seems the future of our clan is bright, with a woman like that as its matriarch, he said to himself, watching as medics carted Hinata and Sakura off the field. You chose well, Sasuke. I dare say she will be a fine wife. Or rather, she already is. Our little girl is all grown up. Mabuki Haruna wept tears of motherly pride. Oh, honey! She's grown so strong. She clasped her hands as if thanking heaven or providence for their daughter's show of skill and power. Beside her, the stout and burly Kizashi, her husband, sniffled. Ah, I'm so proud, he said. Our little Sakura has truly blossomed. Except for her bosom, Mabuki sniffed, smiling wanly. She gave a joking smile. That's still just a bud. Yes, Kizashi repeated, clearing his throat. Our little cherry blossom has truly flowered. Why, before we know it, she'll have given away her cherry to some no-good punk, and then what will she be left with? An empty tree? He laughed tearfully. She'll always have us, Mabuki said. Yes, she'll always have her parents, Kizashi agreed. I refuse to die until she's 100. Now, for the last match of the semifinals. Are you going to fight me, Sasuke? Shino stood across from the one-armed Uchiha, hands in his pockets. He was inscrutable, with his sunglasses and high collar, his face nearly expressionless. Picture-perfect stoicism. But Sasuke could detect a hint of impatience beneath the surface. Shino was actually a rather sensitive guy when you got down to it. He hated to be ignored, and not just because of the dreadful, terrible, simply perfect pun of mushy, meaning bugs, and mushy, meaning to ignore. You're awfully restless, he observed, smirking just a tad. I haven't fought a single serious opponent since the Forest of Death, the insect user said. And even that was only a giant snake. I wouldn't have taken you for the sort of guy to get worked up about fighting. Shino pushed his sunglasses up the bridge of his nose. He may or may not have used this action as an excuse to subtly flip Sasuke the bird. Probably not, but one can always imagine. And I'm not, he said. But combat is an inherent aspect of shinobi discipline, and while I may know full well where I stand in the fields of stealth, tracking, infiltration, and evasion, my fighting ability is less certain. You want to know how good you are in a fight, Sasuke said, cocking his head. Is that it? But you did pretty well in your last 2 matches. Against insignificant opponents, yes, Shino said. He inclined his own head. But you are much stronger, aren't you? The fame of the Uchiha is still great, despite their tragic loss. You heard the press release. Sasuke shrugged. It wasn't that big a loss. Shino hummed thoughtfully. You're not upset about their deaths, then? That was years ago, Sasuke said. I've given up dwelling on the past. From his perspective, this was a perfectly truthful statement. From his perspective. And has that made you stronger? Shino wondered aloud. Your skill precedes you, or at least rumors thereof. You saw my last 2 fights, Sasuke replied. You know what I can do. Shino stared at Sasuke, presumably. It was a little difficult to tell exactly where he was looking, with those sunglasses. Do I? He said. I think you have been holding back. Sakura is not the strongest member of your team. How do I know this? Simple. Akamaru is able to detect a person's chakra and rough combat ability. Shino raised his hand. On the back of it crawled a small Kikaichu. According to Kiba, he continued, Sakura is the weakest member of Team 7. Therefore, you and Naruto are stronger. Despite this, you have not yet displayed any abilities significantly exceeding what Sakura showed in her fight with Hinata. Thus, you have been holding back. Ha! Very good, Sasuke said, smiling. I'd applaud your deductive reasoning, but that would require me to answer an unanswerable question. And I'm not terribly into Zen. He raised his one hand. Shino gave Sasuke a deadpan look. That was a terrible joke. So now you're an expert on humor too? Sasuke laughed. Enough prelude, Shino said. Talk is cheap. He stepped forward and spread his arms. Bugs poured out from under his sleeves, a glistening black mass composed of hundreds of tiny, chitinous forms. It was an entomophobe's worst nightmare come true, a glossy wave of buzzing drones flying out in attack formation. Sasuke teleported past the bugs. 1 second he was several feet away, the next second he and Shino were within accidental kiss range. Sorry, but no, Sasuke said. One close call is more than enough for today. A 6-pointed star encompassed Shino's entire field of vision, black on red on black on white. Tsukuyami. Shino collapsed after 3 seconds spent locked to Sasuke's stare, a dead faint. Fast asleep. He dreamed strangely pleasant dreams of a vaguely boyish girl in a very short skirt, a girl with tan skin and short green hair. Naruto and Sakura weren't the only matchmakers on Team 7. Sasuke was just a lot more subtle about it. Thanks for watching, Shinobi Squad. If you enjoyed this what if, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop your theories in the comments, I'm always reading. Want more Naruto heat? Check out the other videos on the channel. Stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember even shadow clones need love. Peace out, Shinobi.